a critical role in Singapore's development, today it is the world's busiest transshipment port, the world's second busiest container port, and the port which transships 50% of the world's crude oil. Yet, for the typical tourist, it barely registers on their consciousness.
How well do we actually know our islands? How well do we actually even are able to identify the islands when we actually pass them by on the boat? Google actually makes, right? So all these different kinds of stories we're actually collecting as part of the research projects that we're doing.
The stories and the trajectories of people, and the entanglement of these lines and unbounded lines, of these moving as well as unbounded lines, is what forms the web of life. And in these threads,
for you to see, it doesn't finish. Okay, anyway, I think my slides are going to get cut off. For you to see what it's like along there and to see some of the history that leads up to it. This shot is taken from a racket, which is visual. So if you are traveling along the strait, and again, remember all of my photos are from the Malaysian side. So this has been a boat coming out of Sungai Melayu, which is just opposite.
When I was doing field research in Bangkil, in the Riau Islands in 1979. On learning that was from Singapore, the Bangkil people introduced me to Yang Kepet, also known as Maritime by the community. Maritime told me she had moved to Bangkil from Pulau Seking because she had married a man there. The report that we have from the 14th century, there have been pirates in Temasek since long ago, since the 14th century, who obtained goods through pillage and plunder. There is still piracy in the Straits of Malacca now.
That have already been lost and completely transformed. But fortunately, we find that there is a lot of public interest. There has been an increase in public curiosity about the history and heritage of Singapore's offshore islands, as Prof. Hamzah had introduced earlier on this morning. A specific group of islands, which is the scope of this research, and it also covers a particular timeline. This term covers specifically 1920s to 1978, when maps would indicate that this strait that separates the islands which we are focusing our research on and mainland Singapore. Another significant aspect of this transformation was the fact that Masjid Hasanah was built in 1970. This is the replacement mosque for all of the islanders, including Pulau Semulun, Tanjung Keling, and Pulau Damang Laut. And this mosque actually predated the MBF, the Mosque Building Fund. So it is an example of a mosque that was not built under MBF, but located within what is present-day HDB estate. And this has implications on the way in which funding can be sourced to upgrade the mosque, which is happening right now. This is what the chairman had shared with me. And then, these are interesting things to note about the early history or early urban history of Singapore that is not usually talked about. 1 minute, thank you. I'll make my conclusions.
This very quickly demonstrates the sort of change. Pulau Tekong, you also see what the original island looked like, and then the extent of reclamation, and then of course now the whether not just the markers and buoys which mark the edges of the territorial waters or restricted areas, but often also the blast of the Coast Guard sirens. And he continually asks, how do we recognize the sea for the manner in which it has now been corporatized, militarized, and industrialized? I think one of the uniting threads
is yes. So it doesn't jive with what Suratman had written earlier.
On the one hand, you have these real life stories and experiences of people who have been dislocated, removed, and who have this experience of the sea and affected by the state, which is removing them, and it's made into one of those narratives similar to going back to kampung, this nostalgia about kampung, nostalgia about being an islander. To what extent is this danger that even the works like Charles Lim being represented on a Biennale? I also like his work, and I know him personally, but he may have a very genuine relationship to the sea and be very, very critical of what's going on. But again, he ends up representing the very state which creates the borders?
Okay, I think that's a really fabulous question. I mean, again, I'm looking at this rather than I'm looking at the different ways in which artists represent this idea of islanding. Again, as an active verb, and some of it really is about trying to affix, the stories of these islanders that otherwise may be lost. Or ex-islanders, and then there are others, artists who have a different process. And with Charles, I think that his process, in fact, he very clearly states that he doesn't like the idea of sentimentality attached to notions and constructions of the sea. In fact, he rejects that, and he's very interested in the territories that are created either by economic machinery or by cultural apparatuses. And I think that's one of the reasons why his work tends to be used a lot in citations and discussions about the geopolitics of the ocean, but he actually doesn't see himself as, I guess, representing, that sort of, the hand of the state. In fact, if anything else, he's got quite a difficult relationship with that. In terms of sort of oral accounts and truthful narratives can be truthfully used. I mean, that's a very, very difficult space, because I think for any creator, right, where you are utilizing material that has its roots in something very real, there's always this possibility of, is it appropriation, and how much, or is it inspiration, or is it flat out, copying, so it's very difficult. And when, I think people interpret things in very different ways. So for example, you have the, recreation of an attic hut. Some people say that's terrible, it's a travesty, and others say, no, that's great because it's educational. So it's a difficult space.
That has had to leave, but Firdaus would be able to recognize most of these points, because he organized the previous event at which I spoke about one of the aspects that will come out into this presentation. Forgetting and just non-acknowledgement in the names and in the narratives. Or even if the narratives are acknowledged, how do we make sure the narratives are not recast in such a way that is not just lip service to a past? Yeah, does justice to things that happen. I hope I'm putting it delicately enough, but you get the point. Thank you.